How many do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, we are going to move back. We have finished, just as a reminder, we finished 5.1 and we finished. Trustees, could you please take your seats? Trustees in the room? Thank you. We have finished, just as a reminder, we've finished item number 7.1, but we're going to go back at this point and get back on track on the agenda to item number 6. So we're on 6.1. This is the Toronto Lands Corporation 2024-2025 annual operating and capital budgets. I'm going to turn this over to Associate Director Zucker to introduce this report, please.
Thank you, and through the chair. So the report before you represents the approval from TLC for their 24-25, both their operating and their capital budget. They are presented and approved by the TLC board to be forwarded to TSB to be incorporated into the budget and approved through our regular budget process. So this isn't here for approval tonight, but it will be incorporated into our regular budget. So TLC staff worked with TDSB staff to prepare the budget. They worked with both planning and finance. I'm not going to walk through the detail, but can answer any questions. But I just wanted to indicate that through this process, they really did look to maximize the potential of the revenues. You'll see through the next report that where leases are up, they have either renegotiated them and adjusted market value where necessary. And they also were able to achieve a 2% decrease in administrative expenses through going through basically on a line by line basis. So I just wanted to point that out and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I see Trustee Siskandaraja has questions, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, is there a reason why we don't have any TLC staff here? This is, from my understanding, not being on TLC, it seems like a very important report that's in front of us.
Through the chair, unfortunately, we have the CEO is unable to make it this evening. They would usually be here, absolutely, and will be available if we have any other questions that I am unable to answer moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I have a few questions. Just to, again, as somebody who's not on TLC, maybe this is common sense for those sitting on it, but I would like some more clarity. So it seems that we spend $1.6 million on our leases. Can somebody explain? Because I thought we made money on the lease. So obviously we're losing money or spending money somewhere. Can I just get some context on what exactly we're spending?
Through the chair, I will have to get back to you on that one. We do have a net revenue there, so there are some recoveries as well, but I'm not sure what is included in the 1.6 million. So okay. I can get back to you.
Thank you. My next question, and again, I would appreciate just, we were moving towards a more transparent system. So I think just having that for the public would be really beneficial. Through you, Madam Chair. So if I'm understanding the budget correctly, there's a deferred capital improvement revenue. So if I'm understanding that correctly, we're deferring doing some construction work. Is that correct? And if so, is that a good idea when we know construction costs are going up?
So through the chair, that $1 million that you see there called deferred capital improvement revenue is from the revenue that we receive from the leases, we take $1 million and set it aside in order to address any of the health and safety or any other concerns that the lessees have, and we are able to address them in those buildings. So it's a contingency basically set aside in order to cover those costs. So they're not specifically assigned yet, but the intention is to use a portion of that revenue to address any of the repairs in those buildings.
Okay, thank you. That's really, really helpful. My next question, I'm just going in order of the budget sheet. Through you, Madam Chair, the City of Toronto Childcare Umbrella Lease Agreement, there seems to be a bit of a discrepancy from our current budget to the budget that's being proposed between the revenue and expenditure. Why is it so high? Is there any particular reasons?
Sorry, through the chair, could you just direct me to where you're looking or what page?
Sorry, let me just pull it
That's
up.
okay.
It should be on under our lease agreements. It says a City of Toronto childcare. Sorry, it's under operating school facilities.
Okay, great. Thank you. And through the chair, so the revenue is, the reason for the decrease is a result of the space that's being used. I think that the childcare providers have, as a result of the increase in the costs related to the umbrella agreement, looked at the space that they have been using to address those concerns. And I think the other part is in the 23-24 budget, we were anticipating a higher revenue. At the time that we passed the budget, we thought that we would have a higher break-even number, but through the number provided by the province, it's actually quite a bit lower. So I think those two reasons are a reason that you're seeing a decrease there. And so the actual cost for 23-24 will not come in at that $9 million mark. It'll be lower than originally budgeted.
Okay, so through you, Madam Chair, we don't. I mean, I guess it's hard to anticipate, but do we think that we could be in a similar situation for this budget?
Through the chair, we have confirmation from the province now, and we were able to continue the umbrella agreement with a specific number that was increased from the number from, I think it was 2004 that I originally started. So that is good news for us, and it's good news for our providers as well, that we have confirmation between the ministry, the city, and the board about the number, and we were able to continue with the umbrella agreement as opposed to having to dissolve it and have individual leases with each of those providers.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just a few questions around the administrative expenses. We see that the salaries have gone up in this budget. Is this due to the creation of a new position or new positions, or is this just sort of salary increases that happened, in regular intervals to keep up with inflation?
So through the chair, TLC has looked at the organizational structure prior to the new or the interim CEO being in place, and they have made some significant changes with regards to the staffing. They've moved to more of a worker staffing rather than executive level staffing. So we have reduced the number of executives, increased the number of staff support that's provided, and you'll notice that the fees and contractual number has decreased by a little bit more actually. And so the intention was to move away from using contractual or third-party providers to moving more in-house with one of the positions, or sorry, two of the positions. So that's what you're seeing is an increase in salaries and benefits because we will be doing work in-house versus going out to a third party through fees and contractual.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and I think that's a step in the right direction. So I do appreciate that. I know we've had conversations at this board about how much we spend on external consultants to bring people in-house. I think there's some benefits to that. Through you, Madam Chair, I know a conversation that's often happening is the amount of money we spend on professional development and certifications. So I've seen that's gone up as well. Can you just tell us what are some examples of the type of professional development that's happening at TLC?
So through the chair, this would either be professional development that they would require as part of the designations that they have, and also paying for the designation. So if we have engineers on staff, then paying for their engineering annual fees would come out of this amount. But I would have to look further to see what exactly the professional development that's planned is to bring that back.
Thank you. And maybe this is a question that we would like more clarification or a breakdown. And I'm sure they have it. And if you can't answer, just what entails supply and services, right? Because we're also spending a lot of money there. The other question through you, Madam Chair, is why are we paying rent? We have administrative sites at TDSB. We have sites that we often talk about closing. We have sites in our schools. Why are we renting a separate space for a TLC office?
Thank you through the chair. It's a very good question. It is something that we are looking at, and how do we move forward? So we do have a lease obligation right now, and we aren't in a position where we're able to find them space. But as we move forward with our admin site review work, that is something that we're certainly considering, especially given the flexible working arrangements that all of our employees have.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, turning our attention to that would be very important. I mean, I think it's a bit, I'm sure everyone sees the irony that we're in the business of leasing, and then we're leasing our office and, spending a sizable chunk of money on that. Okay, through you, Madam Chair, about the actual leases themselves. I just had a question. With the 4 or 5 places that are in front of us, have they been agreed upon? Have they been signed yet?
So through the chair, are you referring to the next agenda item?
Oh, sorry. I will keep my questions till then.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Associate Director. And I do look forward to getting some of those questions I wasn't able to get answered. Shared. Thanks.
We have 4 people on the list. I'll just say who they are. And
I just wanted to make a comment in regard to the last question that was asked.
yeah, we'll have to wait
fine.
to be
I'll
on
wait.
because it will be, the questions could be answered by the staff. If trustees want to make any comment on a previous speaker, you'll have to still be on the list. So I have Trustee Laskin, Trustee Tidavidis, Trustee Hastings, and Trustee Erhard. So those are the folks on the list now. So Trustee Laskin, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on my colleagues' questions, you will notice that the rents have gone down, though, because they have given up a floor in their leases. And the certifications actually were cut in half. The professional development and certification, it's actually cut in half. It's not gone up. So I really think that under the new management CEO of the TLC, there have been savings already found, and there will continue to be savings. And I just wanted to mention for colleagues that aren't on the TLC, there's a very good working relationship now also between our staff and the TLC staff. For example, the TLC just approved a delegation procedure, and our staff was very helpful in supporting their staff, making sure that the procedures between TDSB and TLC were much more aligned. So I just really want to make a point of saying that we have already seen through this budget process some serious changes, and I think we will see more of them, especially to the bottom line, looking for that promised $150 million in modernization to come back to the TDSB. And I simply wanted to make that point that this is a start. This is the first budget under the acting CEO. And I think that with our staffs working much more closely together, we will see continued trying to mitigate any costs so we can maximize the whole value of TLC and its modernization strategy. So I just wanted to make those comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Trustee Dedivides?
It just wanted to go back to a question that was asked earlier. I'm not sure. I know we're just receiving this for receipt, but not having staff from TLC here to answer questions, very uncomfortable. But then also not receiving a presentation from them, right? We could always read the reports on our own, but you know how they color it and how they portray some of these things is important to get a sense of. So I'm not sure we would be doing our duty by receiving the report without having had that opportunity for interaction. I think that's important. So I think it would be best once people have an opportunity to ask their questions, not to receive this now, but to either move it to next planning committee, to give an opportunity for staff to be here, or to defer it to the board meeting. I think that may be a better place for us to do that without having staff here present to answer some of the questions that people are having.
Thank you, Trustee Dedivides. I just wanted to also say that this is actually for approval, not for receipt as well.
The screen says for receipt, no?
Screen needs to be changed, I think.
Screen is wrong?
I think this has to be approved by the board as a,
I think we are receiving the budget to be incorporated into our budget, which will be approved in May, which is what it says on agenda page 5. Right? Transmittal to the TDSB Board of Directors for approval at their May meeting of the board.
So can I ask, is there a problem in terms of timelines to defer this for approval at a later time?
just to clarify to staff, is this for receipt or for approval right now? Because there's mixed messages. There's a page on the report, agenda page 1 that says, last line, says it's being forwarded to the TDSB board at its January 31st, 2024 meeting for approval.
May I suggest that refer it to board without recommendation?
Do you want to move it?
So those were my questions. I'm happy to get an answer on that, and in terms of timelines, and also to give us some direction in terms of what we need to do, whether it's receipt. It would make sense to approve if it needs to be added to our own budget process.
Director?
Through you, Chair, I'm wondering if this report can be moved to board without recommendation, and then presentation will occur at the board meeting.
Yeah, that's but we have 2 speakers. I just want to make sure, since we had the conversation, if the motion needs to go now, or we can have the 2 speakers and quickly finish that. There's no motion yet. No, I'm just giving them all. Because we are asking them to move a motion, so I'm just saying before. All right, Trustee Dedivides.
I can defer, but if folks want to ask questions now, we can do that. If we're going to defer, might as well leave the questions till later.
My comment was actually to move a similar motion, so I'm happy to second.
Sure.
Trustee Hastings, did you want to make any comment or speak to this?
Through you, Mr. Chair. A question was asked as to why is there a second property when we have so much property to use? this company, TLC, this part of TDSB does go into work on the weekend. And there is no part of this, there's no part of anything that we have that's open to anybody on the weekend. It's locked up, it's shut down. So it is easier for them to use an outside piece of property because you can't get into the buildings, any buildings, on the weekend or holidays. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Hastings, you want to go back on the list to speak?
And just to move to defer the item to board.
Actually, move the item to the board without recommendations. Yeah.
Without recommendations? Okay, go ahead. I'll go ahead and do that.
Someone seconded, just.
I second, but I'd also propose an amendment to that also, that the director requests that, that the chair of the TLC board or its interim CEO attend the full board meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want that to be part of the motion? I'm assuming that would be a process that would be done. Sure. Do you want that to be part of the motion? Okay. All right. Okay. Go ahead.
And I think that would make sense. That's fine as long as folks are okay with that. So then Trustee Arhat was adding to the motion to ask the director to have either the chair of the CEO, the interim CEO of TLC to be present at board.
They want it to be at the part of the motion. All right, so the motion is to move the report to the board without recommendation, and also add that the director requests the chief executive officer of, or interim CEO of, I'm not too sure if it's interim anymore, CEO to also attend the meeting to provide clarification. Do you want to comment on that, or is that good?
Through you, Chair, we will ensure that there is a member of TLC who can speak to both of these reports at the board meeting.
All right.
Through Chair, I don't need to speak to it. I think I already did. So
Yeah,
we can
we
go
have a
ahead.
mover and a seconder. Anyone else wants to speak to this motion? Seeing none, we'll move on to show of hands to vote on this.
Don't we have to vote on the,
Laskin in favor?
we're not doing this as an amendment?
Arts in favor.
Sure.
Trustee Rajwani in
Stand in
favor.
favor.
Logical Singham in favor.
Rose in favor.
Trustee Williams in favor.
Wong in favor.
Sirskala Raja in favor.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
Patel in favor.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Anyone opposed? Okay, hearing none, that's carried. I'm passing the chair back, or do you want me to continue?
Sure, no, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Shan. We are moving on to item number 6.2, Toronto Lands Corporation 2023-2024 Q2 leases and licenses for TDSB. I wonder if somebody wants to do the same thing. May I ask a question? May I pass the chair? Before we move this item, well, it's on the floor already. Well, it is, because it's on the agenda. I'm just wondering, in the interest of time, since we, given the precedent of the motion before, if we could do a similar motion, since, to move this to board without recommendations. So I would just ask if trustees were feeling that way, they might want to move a similar.
I would be happy to move that, Madam Chair. It's Trustee Laskin.
Seconder? Okay. Vice Chair Shen, thank you. All those in favor? We're going to do the exact same motion that we move item number 6.2 to board without recommendations, and that the director seek to have the CEO or someone able.
No, Madam
Yes.
Chair, I did not move that second part. I think that's just understood. I
Okay,
just wanted to
sure.
move it without
Sorry.
recommendation to board.
Okay, so would you like to you just want to move it without recommendations? Vice Chair Shan, is that good with you? Okay, so that's what we're going to vote on by show of hands. All those in favor?
Laskin in favor.
Arts in favor.
Trustee Williams in favor.
Sriskandarajah in favor.
Are there any
Dash
opposed? Trustee Dawson, is that opposed or in favor? Okay. Are there any opposed? Okay, hearing none, that's unanimous. Everyone's in favor. And we can move on to item number 7.2, because we've done 7.1. So we're now at the attendance boundary changes for Secord Elementary School, Crescent Town Elementary School, D.A. Morrison Middle School, and George Webster Elementary School. And I will pass this over to staff. I assume it's System Officer Gowdy, but I'm getting a nod. Okay, so.
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So System Officer Gowdy, thank you for your patience this evening, and over to you.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Chair. Through the Chair. The purpose of this report is to recommend a solution to the accommodation pressures at Secord Elementary School. This report is one of the studies that was approved for us to conduct this school year in the long-term program and accommodation strategy. I'd like to thank Superintendent Nadira Prasad for leading the study with the participation of Principals Janice Chisholm, Avinash Mani, Sohail Sheikh, and Sacha Bazabalian, as well as planning staff Dan Castaldo, David Pulitzer, Giovanna Jadralamo, and Fatima Baba. And I would also like to thank the parents for providing input and feedback. Secord Elementary School is located in the Danforth area in Ward 16. Secord is experiencing significant enrollment growth, largely due to an increase in newcomers to Canada. The school will experience more growth from residential development that is occurring at Main Street and Danforth Avenue intersection. Secord currently has a large 14-unit porta-pack on site, and it just received a standalone portable this year. More standalone portables will be required if there is no change. The school site has become highly constrained with the addition of the standalone portable, and additional portables should be avoided. A local feasibility team involving the local trustee, superintendent, principals of Secord Elementary School, Crescent Town Elementary School, D.A. Morrison Middle School, George Webster Elementary School, and central staff studied the area and is recommending that the boundaries be changed between Secord and Crescent Town for September 2024. This will decrease the enrollment at Secord by directing approximately 110 students to Crescent Town over time. Crescent Town is underutilized at 53% and has space to accommodate the students. The addresses to be assigned to Crescent Town are closer to Crescent Town than to Secord. The local feasibility team is recommending that this be phased in so the students currently attending Secord and their younger siblings will be allowed to stay at the school until they graduate, and all new registrants will be directed to Crescent Town. Because Crescent Town feeds into a different middle school than Secord, it is recommended that the boundaries of D.A. Morrison Middle School and George Webster Elementary School also change to allow the students in the boundary change area to attend the same middle school as their peers. There is sufficient space at George Webster to receive these students. Appendix A of this report contains tables that show the impact on enrollment and utilization of the proposed boundary change on the schools. Appendix B contains two maps that show the current and proposed boundaries. A virtual public meeting was held to share the proposal and collect feedback. The meeting was attended by approximately 45 people. An online survey was also available for people to complete. Most of the feedback received indicated support for the boundary change. Further accommodation solutions will be required for this area. Staff will be submitting another report to board in the future on residential developments to redirect to schools outside of the area that have space. The long-term solution for Secord is to build a larger replacement school on the site. A business case for this replacement school was submitted to the ministry as part of the last round of capital priority projects. This concludes our presentation. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, System Officer Gowdy. We have Trustee Arts with a question, please.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I just want to say a huge thank you to all the staff involved and the community for participating. This, in addition to the public consultations, this item also came up for discussion at the school council meetings. And the parents in the area, families in the area are mostly upset that there's another portable on their site. As we know, all the former boards the former 6 boards that made up the TDSB had different priorities in how they built schools and what kind of land. And East York is one of those areas that did not build schools on very much land. So most school sites are constrained, and Secord has, since before 2012, in my awareness, Secord has been advocating for a new school and changes. They've had their porta pack, so 14 portables for a very long time. And, you know, staff do an amazing job, but this is a solution that will hopefully keep them from having essentially their entire yard taken up by portables. And it's just the first of a bunch of studies. So I'm really appreciative to staff to the work that's happening here. Adding more students to Crescent Town is also really important, because I understand from staff that the one thing that maybe is standing in the way of getting approval to build a new school at Secord is that the neighboring school, Crescent Town, has space in it. So adjusting those enrollments so that we have more students attending Crescent Town, and we take some of the pressure off of Secord, will go a long way to both the business case, short-term and long-term solutions for the school. And like other areas of the city, there'll be more coming for this area as we deal with the high-intensity growth along the transit corridor. So thanks again. I hope that the board will support. I know the community is in support of both the short-term and long-term solutions to address the ongoing enrollment pressures in the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. Seeing no further questions, I think we can open the vote on this item. Oh, my apologies. We need a mover and a seconder.
Trustee Arts?
Sure.
Trustee
I've got Trustee Arts and Trustee Dawson. Thank you.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
Trustee Rajwani in favor.
Trustee Ghost in favor.
Trustee Williams in favor.
Patel in favor.
Wong in favor.
Trustee Shan in favor.
Trustee Pei in favor.
I'm in favor. Trustee Rajikula-Singham?
In favor.
Thank you. We're closing the vote. That has carried. Thank you. Moving on to item number 7.3. This is the capital revitalization strategy. I'm going to turn it over to Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I will keep my remarks brief. I would like to thank Associate Director Stacy Zucker and the team within Business and Operations that contributed to the development of the capital revitalization strategy. It is no secret that TDSB schools on average are over 60 years old, and in many situations they look it. 60 is not the new 40 when it comes to school buildings showing their age. Our students deserve modern learning environments such as new library learning commons, natural light, modern labs, physical activity areas, as well as gyms, ventilation, and roofs. This capital revitalization plan sets out ambitious but realistic goals for those important improvements. And you will see the connection to this important work in our renewed multi-year strategic plan that is presented later on this agenda. These changes will enable all of our schools to be safer, healthier, and more modern places to inspire minds and build futures. This is the first strategy for the Toronto District School Board in over a decade, and I can't thank staff enough, and I'm excited about the changes that our students, our staff, and school communities will see in the years ahead. I would ask Associate Director Zucker to present this report.
Kleenex there.
Thank you, Director. And I just want to say that we are very, very excited to bring this report back to you for approval. As you may recall, we presented the strategy in October for feedback on the framework, the goal, and the guiding principles, and that is what we are asking for approval for today. We used the feedback that was provided along with the feedback that we received from senior team, from the facilities leadership group, as well as the ministry, to make slight revisions and to bring this back tonight for approval. As just a reminder, the framework describes the elements that will be used to assess the building's condition, including the facility condition index, which is what we mainly use now. Our program spaces, so again, creating spaces that are equitable by design across the TDSB. We will use sustainability as an element, accessibility, equity, and public confidence. And by public confidence, we really mean that the perception that people have of our schools, the way that they feel when they see our schools, from the curb appeal to the entrances to the washrooms and the paint and everything else. It also outlines how our buildings will be classified as either schools requiring minimal improvement, moderate improvement, or extensive improvement. And the report describes the type of projects that would be undertaken, including light retrofits, which can be done during the school year or over the summers, and there will not have to be any displacement of students or significant displacement. We mean that the school would not have to be closed. Deep retrofits, where we would close the school or relocate the school temporarily to do the work in the school over a period of time and then move students back. Or we have replacement schools or new construction. Sometimes we have new construction that relates to enrollment growth that have nothing to do with revitalization, but still are a significant component of our capital plan. We also, through the report, have provided a high-level timeline for when this work would take place and when the steps would take place. And we know that the next steps involve identifying standards, assessing and classifying schools, determining a budget and allocating the budget, and the timeline for implementation. We also know, and we heard, that communication will be a very important part of the strategy, and it will be what is necessary to ensure the success of the strategy. So the communication plan will also be an important component that needs to be developed. The guiding principles are listed on page 47 of the agenda. They are very closely tied to the elements for assessment and will help to guide the implementation of the strategy. And as the director indicated, there is a goal that is attached to the strategy of not having any school buildings classified as requiring extensive improvement by 2035. That is a 10-year goal, and yes, it is ambitious, but we do believe possible when all the pieces fall into place, including the ability to close schools. We will continue to assess and monitor our progress towards this goal and would have to make any adjustments if necessary, especially if some of the conditions for success are not met again through no fault of TDSB. So we are, again, very excited to bring this forward. We are asking for approval of the framework, the guiding principles, and the goal. And we are, again, there is a lot of work once this is approved to work towards actually identifying those schools. And again, the timeline is outlined in the report. And we will certainly come back to and update trustees on the progress that we are making towards this. The intention is that we would be able to start the implementation of the strategy in 2025. And so all of the pre-work that would happen, all of the assessments that would have to happen, and the classifications that would have to happen would take place over the next year. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Zucker. We have a growing speakers list. We're going to start with Trustee McLean, followed by Laskin, Dawson, Earhart, and DeVitis. Go ahead, Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair. This is an exciting initiative and proposal, and I guess my initial, have we had conversations with the ministry about either official or unofficial about our intentions and our plan and their willingness to, like, part of the funding for this is approval of POD, and we've had trouble getting stuff done in time, and there's lots been made of how long it takes us to do things, and to get things like the use of POD approved. This is ambitious in its scope and in the timeframes that were being suggested that we can do this. I would suspect that we're going to need them to want to share our vision and share our desire to get this done. So I guess my question is, have we gauged their interest and willingness to participate?
Thank you, and through the chair. So we did meet with the ministry staff, a number of capital staff, and walked them through the presentation that trustees would have seen in October. I will say there was some concern from the ministry that it had moved away from using facility condition index as the sole determinant of the condition of a building. And we've taken that into account. We've had further conversations and looked at things like program spaces, things like sustainability, accessibility, equity, all of the other components. When we make those improvements, we are actually improving the condition of the building and improving our FCI. But I think it's important for us as a school board and as somebody that's not just looking at the condition of the buildings, but actually the spaces that we're providing to students so that they can learn. We thought it was really important to have it broken out that way and to place importance on some of those key areas. So to your point, they understand our strategy. I'm not sure that they're 100% on board with us not using FCI as the main determinant. That being said, we will continue to work with them. And I think as we progress and we get a year or two into the strategy and they see how the strategy is actually improving the condition of our buildings, that they will be more willing to support us through the use of proceeds. But the other thing that I'll say is we do not need their permission to use proceeds for anything that is SCI, School Condition Index related. And a lot of these projects will be able to be funded through that program, and therefore we won't need the permission of the ministry to use proceeds for that purpose. And I do think it was important for us to show them that we have a plan for our proceeds of disposition.
Thank you, and thank you for the response. Thank you through the chair. I guess my concern was in your response. I guess they didn't like the SCI, and so we have the freedom, as long as we're using inside that mechanism, to do the work that that's described here. But you also shared a reluctance to rely on that. So did they indicate to you that they were moving in a different direction, creating different mechanisms that would potentially require, if they were going to go down a different path or suggest we needed to go down a different path, then that would make it a little more complicated for us to use the POD. Was there any, were they willing to get out of the way and pretend we're from Missouri and show me how it works, and they could take the bow for it if we did really well, and then whack us with a big stick if it didn't go as well.
Through the chair, they understood the direction that we were moving in for things like accessibility, and I'll use that as an example. That is one of the things that we have on here, is one of the ways that we're going to assess our buildings. I think it's an important thing. I think it's a necessary element that we have to consider. Accessibility currently is not funded by the ministry in any way through, it cannot be SCI. It could be renewal, but our renewal dollars are small. So when we talked about accessibility specifically, it was indicated that without a funding source for it, we would need to use proceeds of disposition, and that we would be coming forward. So I think that part of the work that we're going to have to do within the next year is identify those components of the strategy which would require ministry approval, and get in front of them quickly or well in advance, recognizing that the timelines take a while. And with the capital plan, we will have to ensure that there's such a variety of work that we'll be able to continue with the strategy without that approval if we don't receive it in a timely manner. But again, accessibility is one of the main areas where there is not a funding source other than requesting proceeds of disposition. And they are aware, and they know that it's it's not just an important priority, it's a necessity that we have to do this. And so I believe that we will get that approval. And I believe that it will, as we do it, impact our facility condition index by making improvements to other areas as we do that work. So like I say, in the beginning, it may be a little more challenging in some areas for us to get those approvals, but I do believe that once they see how this is working, how we're using our funds, and then some, how we're using our proceeds, and how the condition of our schools is actually improving, and that the strategy is successful, I think it will become much easier to get those approvals.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate the effort, and excited by the timeline. I guess my only question my last question, and I'll let my colleagues ask some questions. Are we confident that, given the ambitious nature of the timeline shared, that there will be construction talent, staff available to perform what we're hoping to get done in the timelines that we're hoping to do it in?
Thank you. And through the chair, part of the work that's going to have to be done within the next year is to ensure that we have adequate resources in order to be able to do this work. And for Maya and her team to look at what they can do versus what we may have to go externally to get done. So we know that that's something that we have to take into account. Our belief is that we will and should have enough resources, or be able to acquire those resources as part of the overall strategy. So it may require us to have, at least temporarily, some additional staff that would be funded through this process. But that it can't work if we don't have adequate resources. And I think that's what you're saying, or that there aren't construction companies available to do the work. And so I think, again, doing the planning well in advance, ensuring that we know the work that's going to happen over the next year or two, and to be able to get those out to tender in a timely basis, which is what our facilities department and our procurement department have been really good at in the past, is identifying those projects early, getting out early to make sure that we have them. It's going to be that just quite a bit bigger, because there will be projects that, or there will be a timeline attached to this. And again, if there are any circumstances that don't allow us, or that we think that we're going to be off track on this target, then we will come back, or this goal, sorry, as soon as possible, to let trustees know, to let the public know, and to see what we can do to either get back on track with additional resources or adjust the timeline.
Thank you. I'm boring the chair. I apologize.
Not bored, I'm just not a morning, or I'm not an evening person, I'm a morning person. Thank you, Trustee McLean, for your great questions, in all honesty. We have up next Trustee Laskin, followed by Dawson, Earhart, D. DeVitis, Skandaraja, and Arts. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was really thrilled when this came to us in the fall, and I'm very happy to see it here for approval. I just have some questions in terms of the action plan and timelines and communication. Will the information, once you develop the standards and complete the building assessment, will that be public information? Through you, Madam Chair. Right now, we have for every school, we have the facility condition index online. I guess what I'm hoping for is at some point when all the assessment is done, all the buildings are classified, all the projects are itemized, for example, painting, that schools will be able to see themselves reflected in the 10-year plan with some sense of milestones as to when the work could be completed. That would be ideal, and I'm just wondering what staff are thinking in terms of the public accountability and giving communities hope that we are getting to them within the 10-year time period. So I'm just wondering about that through you, Madam Chair, to staff.
Thank you. Through the chair, we definitely will be providing the assessments publicly. As for the timeline, I don't know if we will be able to provide the 10-year timeline, but there certainly will be a sort of maybe a 2 to 5 year timeline that is provided. And it really is contingent on, so a lot of the work will not happen in schools that have not gone through pupil accommodation reviews if they are scheduled to go through a pupil accommodation review. So that will also impact timing for schools. But the intention is to be as transparent as possible, to provide as much notice as possible, and as far in advance as possible, because you're right, Trustee Laskin. I think it's important for schools to be able to see where they are in that timeline and to be excited about it and to know that it's going to happen. And we will also there will be a variety of projects that happen at the same time. It will happen all across the city at the same time. It won't be concentrated in one area. So I think it's important for the entire district to be able to see themselves in the work that's happening across the board.
Thank you very much through you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up then, I think in the communication then, I think it's really, really important to state up front, for example, the issue of the accommodation reviews. Obviously brilliant. For example, there was a school that just got, brand new windows a few years ago, and now it's being renovated. So I think the staggering of this and making sure we know what we're doing before we set out to do things in terms of the 2 to 5 year plan, I think is really, really critical. And the communication about this from a confidence in public education. I mean, so many of our schools, because of their age, they have character, but they also need a lot of work. And I love the idea that you're talking about students' learning environments and educators' working environments, as opposed to just buildings. So all that language in the communication is really important. And I think this is something that that I'd love to see kind of like very regular updates on. Obviously you'll bring those back to the board as appropriate, but updating our website, updating through School Connects, bringing it to the community through the advisory committees. Like it's just, I think, very, this of all the things we do, because it's so tangible, I think will really make a huge difference to the way people feel. And a simple coat of paint goes such a long way. So obviously we need the staff, they're number one, but the building and the environment also makes a huge difference. So I'm just fully supportive and really looking forward to the communication pieces and getting the word out there. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to staff.
Okay, up next we have Trustee Dawson.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you so much to staff for this report. I really appreciate how comprehensive it is. I have a couple questions. So firstly, where do school grounds fit into this?
So thank you, and through the chair, it's a good question, and I think there are a few areas that school grounds will fit in. Some school grounds are program spaces, so it will be impacted by that benchmark, that public confidence piece, especially sort of the exterior appearance, and also accessibility and equity are components as well. So I think you're going to see it in a number of areas. So when we talk about schools, we're not just talking about the indoor, but also the outdoor spaces as well.
Okay, thanks so much. And then my second question is, where would student voice or community voice come in to play?
Thank you, and through the chair, that is part of the feedback that we did receive, and we know how important it is to gather that student voice. Certainly, when we are doing the assessments and looking at public confidence, I think there'll be a component of feedback from students. In addition, when we're looking at program spaces, at least when we're initially setting up what those spaces look like, we will hear from students as well as experts in the areas in order to see what our I'm losing the word, but it's our design guidelines. There will be student voice there as well. We will look at as many inputs for student voice as possible throughout the process, because we do recognize that, again, we're talking about buildings, and I think that this was when we're talking to the ministry, they're seeing it as an asset that has monetary value and how it looks on the books of the province. And we're looking at schools as a place where our students come and not only learn, but how it impacts their well-being. So I think that it's really, really important to ensure that they feel good about these spaces, and that it's not just we're improving our numbers.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Trustee Earhart, followed by D. DeVitis, Triskandaraja, and Arts.
Thanks very much. And thanks so much for this report and work. I'm going to ask a lot of questions about facilities, but I really want to echo the comments of trustees previous, and also the comments that I heard from staff just around perceiving our buildings and assessing our buildings and investing in our buildings, not just as assets, but I see them as part of the service provision. They're part of what is done and how we feel about what is done, how staff feel about it, how children feel about it, how our community feels about our public education. And so I see this as so important as part of modern service provision. And I don't think that education is alone in that. I think we're seeing that in ideas in health. We're seeing it in justice. We're seeing it in children's services and welfare. This is not a changing the way we see our assets is that's broader. And I think it's so important in education. that being said, what I'm going to ask about is about the core facilities. So I wanted to ask about the ranking criteria and how they link to the guiding principles, because I love the guiding principles. And I wanted to know in particular, and just being conscious of discussions tonight, where HVAC and air quality will fit into the assessment criteria, and how other health and safety components that don't fit into current facility condition index would fit in. And so my understanding of facility condition index is that it's based on the existing facility as designed. But there are some things we know for health and safety that need to go above and beyond that. And I'm wondering how that fits in to the assessment criteria. I saw it for accessibility and I saw it for sustainability, which I was very happy to see. And yeah, thank you very much.
So thank you, and through the chairs. So with regards to ventilation and health and safety and where it fits in, it certainly is part of the facility condition index for the most part. You're right, if it's a replacement. I do also see it in accessibility, sustainability, and even equity and public confidence, right? We heard today from a number of delegates who were concerned. And so I think that really a lot of the, if we look at a component on its own or something on its own, it almost fits into all these criteria. So it's going to be really important when the person who will be leading this comes into place is looking at how we are assessing each one of these to ensure that things like student voice are included, to ensure that where ventilation falls, where outdoor play spaces fall, to make sure that we're properly including it in the assessment. So that's where I think a lot of the work is going to be done up front, is what are those sort of standards for our design guidelines, and how do we assess, and what are we looking at when we assess each of these elements.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And I will likely be asking as we go through the other steps into assessment criteria about that piece and how it fits. So just for awareness, that I know that's something I won't be able to help myself. I'll be looking for it.
Sorry, and as with regards to the guiding principles, we did try to tie the guiding principles back to how we're assessing the building. So again, health and safety and how it ties back. I'm just going to pull up the guiding principles, because I see the consistent range and quality of program spaces. We were really looking at sort of that program piece. Buildings and sites barrier-free, obviously, accessibility, health and safety, as we said, it fits into all of them, safe, welcoming environments, sort of that program space piece, as well as public confidence. So we did try to ensure that our guiding principles were guiding the development of the assessment criteria, and then also helping us to determine how we implement the framework.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is, and I'm still learning about capital funding. And so I think it came out through Trustee McLean's questions just around how much non-SCI funding criteria funding would be needed over and above what we have in this. And that's something I'll be looking for as we move forward, is just to get a sense of how much of this can be covered within what is currently funded by the province, irrespective of levels, and how much it can't be covered because it's not within their criteria. And I really want to invite everyone to keep imagining what will support student success, irrespective of whether it's required or not, because if we can't envision it, we can't work to make it happen. And so I'm just really appreciative of the thinking on this. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Earhart. Up next, we have Trustee DeVitis.
Thank you. Just want to start by saying how excited I am about seeing this. Obviously, not all of us get excited by spreadsheets about future capital projects and things like that. But this, I think, embodies I think it was Trustee Laskin that used that word, and absolutely. But not just hope that very particular thing will be fixed in XY school, but hope that we can develop a better pathway for public education in the TDSB, and I think that's significant. I was happy to endorse plans. I was happy to endorse something earlier today that we dealt privately. I was happy to endorse a number of other changes because I think they speak to a vision and a strategy that will allow us to become modern in how we deliver our services. And I think that's important, and we should celebrate that. So I have some questions in relation to timeline and how that goes, but I wanted to make that statement first because it's a lot of hard work embedded in these three bullets that we have up on the screen right now, and a lot more work coming out. And 2035 seems like a long time ago, but to put it into perspective, that Ontario line probably won't be open by then, so probably not that big of a deal for us to try and beat them to some of the things that we would like to do before they open. So to go back, and it was asked already, but just to understand it if there was a school council somewhere and they wanted to see the listing of capital projects to 2035, when will that go live? When will they be able to see that information on the website somewhere? What do we expect?
So through the chair, the way I think I envision it right now is we will have to do an assessment of all of our schools, so all of our buildings. So we have up to 600 buildings that we will have to be assessing. We know at least currently which of those schools have been identified for a pupil accommodation review. So we know that until we can go through those pupil accommodation reviews, we're gonna pause there. So I think we'll at least be able to identify. They'll know what work needs to be completed in their schools, and they'll know that we've identified that work to happen in the school. I would say if you're going through a pupil accommodation review and there are 3 secondary schools, they're all identified and we're gonna be consolidating to 2. Obviously, we don't know which 2 those are, so that's where I think the challenge comes in of specifying a date, because we don't want to commit to something which may not happen based on the results of the pupil accommodation review. So I think, again, that 2 to 5 year time, every school will see how they've been assessed. Every school will see what work needs to be done in their schools. With regards to a timeline, I see it from a 2 to 5 year and a moving timeline as we move through the strategy. We would definitely be reporting back on the timeline and the work that has been identified and what's been completed and everything else. So I don't know necessarily if every school in TDSB will be able to, as soon as the assessment is done, see, oh, we're gonna get our work done in 2034. I don't think we'll be looking that far in advance, but they'll at least know on a probably 5 years, I think is reasonable. And then once we go through accommodation reviews, we can start adding to that list. So that's the intention anyways, is that we can identify the schools, we can identify the assessment, we can identify the type of work that we would do if we were to do the work once they've been through an accommodation review.
And we're in 2000, through the chair, we're in 2024 now. The report speaks about 2025 in very general terms. Would that be the timeline for which some of those schools would start to be able to see some of that information? So, parent councils and PAC types and all the different stakeholder groups out there would be able to start to see that information around then?
Through the chair, that's the intention. They should see it before then so that we can start in 2025. This is intended to be a 10-year strategy. So that the intention is the first step again would be the assessment. That's going to take a little while. Then for those that we think that should happen closer to the beginning of the timeline, we'll have to start doing some realistic budget calculations and then slotting them in based on the annual budget for the strategy.
Yeah, and as we can all imagine, that's a lot of work too, right? So would the report also speaks to construction sort of and uses the year 2025, 12 months out from now. Is that the timeline at which I guess in the lead up to the 2025 budget, at which we'll start being able to tie the policy and the framework here to actual projects. Is that what we're looking at?
Through the chair, yeah, that would be the intention.
Okay. And then the last question is more about communications. I think a great part of what we need to do on this collectively is to communicate the projects, the wins, to celebrate them when we can, and so on. Is there going to be sort of a little report that sort of speaks to how that may happen? Is there any thoughts around how that may be involved? I mean, we don't have the capacity now to deal with all the celebrations we're going to have because of all the red ribbon ceremonies, because of all the projects we're going to have to do. So, like, what's the thinking around that?
So I believe that when you look at the capital budget moving forward, I think as you indicated, you'll see how it ties into this report. I think, now we've got a goal that we're having approved by the board, so it's up to us to monitor it. Well, it's up to you to monitor it and to be able to ensure that we're on track. So we will have to bring that information to trustees. And so I think locally, there'll definitely be more communication about specific projects, but I think as a district, you'll see communication about, these were the, I'm not even going to make a number up, but 50 projects that were happening in the year. Here's where we are, here's how we're doing, here's what's completed, here's what's coming up next. So I see that as some sort of regular reporting.
And as the last comment and question, I'm very happy to see in the report language that speaks about how, buildings have to be welcoming and that type of language. I think embedded into that is the need for that strategy to communicate to the public what we're doing, how we're doing it, when we're doing it, and to engage the public in that conversation. Because again, this is about making our public education system better and fixing and improving our public spaces, to speak to what Trustee Earhart was speaking. So again, very happy to see this moving along. I would love to see more detailed information, more meat to the bone in terms of how we're going to carry out that communication as we move forward, but look forward to that conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Gidavidis. Next up, we have Trustee Shishkandaraja. Please go ahead. Trustee Shishkandaraja, you're next.
Sorry, I wasn't able to come off mute. Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you to staff. As my colleagues have shared, we've been waiting for this report and very excited by it. I only have one question, and Trustee Earhart brought it up, and I don't think I heard an answer. I think this is absolutely wonderful. Everybody's looking forward to this. The community, this is, one of the biggest complaints that we get is about our facilities. And I think, a slap of paint is great and paving is great, and it takes a very long time to even get that done. But if we want to do this in a meaningful way, in a comprehensive way, in a way that's on a large in terms of scale and impact, how can we realistically do all this without the province stepping up and providing the funding that we need? We've constantly heard about the repair backlogs. So I think to the question that Trustee Earhart brought up, I'm curious, how much of this can we get done and to what scale? And, what are we having conversations? I'm sure we're always having conversations with the province, but I just want to, I want to temper the optimism, not to be a pessimist, but I just don't want our public to kind of get carried away with this without recognizing the limitations and constraints that bound the work that we are able to do. So, yeah, any input or would be really helpful, I think, to me and to my colleagues and to the public.
So thank you. It is a great question, and we are reviewing the budget. There are, I'm going to say, 4 main funding sources right now. Our renewal dollars, which is about $50 million a year. our SCI dollars, about 350 a year. We have our proceeds of disposition, and as we have a carry forward, and as we continue to sell properties, that number should continue to increase. And we even saw that through the admin site review, we'll also increase our proceeds of disposition. Over time, as we work through our pupil accommodation reviews, we should also see possibly our proceeds of disposition increase. We're also working with TLC through their modernization strategy. And we should see if our first sort of real proposal to the ministry with regards to St. Margaret's in Scarborough to see how that is received by the ministry. That should help us because we can use the value of our own properties. In addition, we'll see a number of podium schools in different developments across the province, across the city. And we will also, through the capital priorities funding, look for funding from the ministry. We'll also, some of our deferred backlog will be reduced through school closures. So the intention is that there will be multiple sources of funding, and not all of it, well, I think everything that we do will be part of the capital revitalization strategy. The timing may be dictated by some health and safety concerns, right? Like if there's a health and safety concern in a school, then we would address that, but address other things as well and be able to move that. So that should dictate some of the timing that's happening. So I believe that once we look at the assessment and look at the work that needs to be done and are able to estimate a budget, we will see if there are any shortfalls. But again, sometimes the ministry allows us to ask for additional funding of a school that maybe it's more realistic to ask for funding to rebuild the school rather than to fix the school. And so we will also be, through our capital priority submissions, looking at that area. So I think we're optimistic that through multiple ways, we should be able to fund the majority of the projects. But again, once we have done the full assessment, we'll be in a better position to be able to provide that information.
Thank you for that. I think it's great. I think it's great, the numbers that were laid out, but I just want to reiterate to the public that I think it was March, I believe, of last year, that our renewal backlog was at 4.2 billion, if I'm correct. And that doesn't come close to the numbers that were just cited. So I just wanted to put that out there that this report is really great in giving the directions of what we want to do. But again, we are very, very underfunded in terms of what we would like to do and what we need to do. And so this is an uphill battle, and I hope that we get the public support on this as well in asking for the urgency for these repairs from our provincial counterparts. Thank you again, staff, for all the work on this.
Okay, and the final speaker on the list is Trustee Arts, please.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank staff for not just including, but prioritizing accessibility. I know this is a conversation that comes up frequently at SEAC, and that accessibility within our schools is part of our legal duty to accommodate. And it's really unfortunate that the ministry, the government, is not prioritizing accessibility, because the Ministry of Education also has a human rights duty to accommodate in the education system, and it should be a funded priority. I would like to invite staff to come speak to SEAC at some point this year. I know the budget process is coming up, and it gets busy, but we've had a lot of conversations about about accessibility, and that it's really more truly accessible spaces really go beyond mobility ramps and elevators. That truly accessible spaces think about all the different ways that people need to be accommodated in order for community to come in, families to come in and take advantage of our spaces and be welcomed into our schools. Some of the trustees that went to visit Kawartha Pine Ridge and went to the new Native Community Center on one of the reserves, we saw a community space that was not just built for physical disability, but every sign was in multiple languages and in Braille. Places, there was just that additional layer of thought in terms of who we know is coming into our buildings and or who they know is coming into their buildings and what they need to be welcomed. So I would invite staff to come present this great work and meet with CACT and have a conversation from our expert advisors on that committee, and maybe some discussions on how we really push the province to make accessibility and their legal duty to accommodate a priority in their funding model. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Arts. So with that, I don't see any other speakers on the list, so I think we can open this up for approval. Oh, and I need a mover and a seconder for this.
Sriskandaraja.
And Sriskandaraja, thank you.
Trustee Williams in favor.
Trustee Rajwani in favor.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
Shan in favor.
Trustee Pei in favor.
Roger Gossingham in favor.
Ted in favor.
Trustee Gilson in favor.
He's in favor.
Sriskandaraja in favor.
And that has carried. Moving on in the agenda, we are now at item number 7.4. This is the multi-year strategic plan, 2024 to 2028. This is update number 3, the results of consultation. I'm going to turn it over to Director Russell Rollins to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and through the chair. The renewal of the multi-year strategic plan is an exciting opportunity to collectively reflect on accomplishments and to collaboratively develop the priorities or strategic directions to focus improvement for our students' academic achievement, well-being, and equity over the next 4 years. Before we discuss our way forward, let's take a moment to look in the rearview mirror to understand the journey to this point. Back in 2018, when the vision for learning was first established, back in 2018, pardon me, the vision for learning was first established. Quickly thereafter, in 2019, there was a provincial budget reduction, which led to approximately $100 million budget deficit. In addressing this budget deficit, it greatly impacted the resources that were allocated to the then multi-year strategic plan. We all know that in the winter spring of 2020, we were faced with the COVID-19 pandemic, which also impacted the implementation of the vision for learning. In 2021, the Board of Trustees passed a pandemic recovery plan to address the changing conditions for teaching and the different needs that were emerging for our students. This plan had its own goals and strategies. Here we are in 2024 with a renewed multi-year strategic plan. This process began in 2022 when staff proposed the renewal of our plan and priorities for the next 4 years. This evening, you will learn what we heard in the consultation with students, parents, guardians, caregivers, staff, and community members, to mention just a few stakeholders. I believe that you will hear through our consultant, Tana Turner, that they are clear that education has the power to transform lives and life opportunities. The renewed or revised multi-year strategic plan, which is in draft before you this evening, is tentatively titled Inspiring Minds and Building Futures. I think this captures the hope that came forward through the consultations, as well as our commitment and obligations. Within the renewed plan, you will see 5 strategic directions. As Canadians, we are committed to implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action within the framework of the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous People. We recognize in particular that as a school system, we continue to educate students in the shadow of residential schooling, and that the onus really is on us to address the intergenerational and ongoing impact on Indigenous people. We must find meaningful ways to work with Indigenous people to support reconciliation. The presence of this goal is both symbolic and visionary, but it is also our accountability and our public promise. You will also see strategic directions related to belonging, achievement, thriving, and revitalizing our schools' learning spaces and working spaces. These priorities, which will be explained further by Superintendent Elizabeth Addo, are underpinned by our commitment to equity. You will see in this report that the foundation of this work is equity. We have chosen not to include it as a strategic pillar, and we will take your advice this evening as to where it should best be positioned. Our strategic priorities rest on the conditions of success, which are the foundation for higher achievement, greater belonging and engagement for our students, and that it is through this engagement, belonging, and quality teaching that respects their identities, their interests, their skills, that students will have the opportunity to learn and develop so that they have viable options to build a future, to thrive after graduation. We are hoping that the framework that you see here, which will be elaborated upon in a future report, sets the context for inspiring minds and building futures. We look forward to your constructive feedback this evening as we take another important step toward a renewed multi-year strategic plan and better outcomes and experiences for all of our students. I will welcome System Superintendent Elizabeth Addo and our partner, Tana Turner, who conducted the consultation.
Thank you very much, Director Colleen Russell-Rollins, and through the chair, I'd like to begin by saying thank you very much for the partners, Tana Turner, Stacy Lewis, Amy Presley, trustee liaisons, and Angela Woodside for supporting the gathering information phase of the renewal. I'm excited to provide you with the multi-year strategic plan renewal update number 3 as we complete the phase of gathering information and presenting our best thinking based on our feedback from our students, staff, educational partners, and trustees. Next slide, please. We are currently in the stage 3 of developing the multi-year strategic plan, and it's stage 3 of stage 4 process. On the next slide, you'll see our overall various engagement pathways. We heard from over 8,000 respondents. And if we can advance to the next slide, please. 8,000 respondents, individuals and groups engaged in the multi-year strategic plan renewal process. There were a variety of vehicles, including the online survey, ward forums, engaging Heritage Months, school council chairs, Urban Indigenous Education Center, in Toronto Indigenous Youth Center, elders, and many, many more. On the next slide, you will see a map representing the online survey responses based on the postal codes provided through the online survey. 70% of the respondents included their postal codes in the survey, and the mapping represents a combination of both individual and group submissions. This mapping was used to guide where additional and intentional engagement would be required. And you can see in the northeast and northwest part of the city, we had additional engagement with intentionality by partnering with the community support workers, where we leveraged their relationships that they had with community members to engage in additional engagement opportunities. On the next slide, you'll see Director Colleen Russell-Rollins has highlighted our proposal in the title for our commitment to the multi-year strategic plan, Inspiring Minds and Shaping Futures. And so over the next few slides, you're going to see some collective thinking around the framework. So in this slide, you'll see what, as a board, we value that's embedded within the multi-year strategic plan. So this is predicated on our support for every student, and you'll see the updated language to include students with disabilities, special needs, and intersecting identities, so allowing each student that we support across the Toronto District School Board reaches their full potential. We know when we heard from our consultations that our partnerships with students, staff, parents, caregivers, and community members is really important, and this is something that we've highlighted in the value statement. Working with positive relationships and shared leadership in both our learning and working spaces is really important. And as we move into 2024 and 4 years beyond, our ability to be accountable and innovative as we do this work is really important. TDSB is one of the largest employers in GTA with not only Ontario, so the diversity of student staff and parent caregivers in the community is also very important. And this leads into the contributions of highly skilled and diverse staff. And in 2024 and beyond, the fact that we have digital citizenship and environmental stewardship is increasingly important. On the next slide, this just amplifies our commitment to the Truth and Reconciliation of Canada calls to action. And we know that resolution in June 2022 was an important one that was established by the board, and that we commit to the implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action, and it's including the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People, and this is all governed under the framework for reconciliation. As we move on to the next slide, we know that, and we heard over very deeply, that equity is the foundation of our work, and we need to look on how we're going to include this work as our foundation. So as a strategic direction where it might have given more prominence or profile in terms of a strategic direction, or in terms of a guiding principle where it will be embedded throughout the 4 strategic directions. On the next slide, what you'll see before you is our best thinking from all our collaborations. And so with Truth and Reconciliation, which amplifies and reinforces our commitment to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action. And then we're talking about, in the next strategic direction, about articulation of around our achievement commitment, that we're focused on high levels of achievement, success, and personal development of all students. Sense of belonging and well-being for both staff and students resonated extremely throughout the consultation. And this belonging pillar speaks to students having a sense of belonging, that students are engaged, and that they're valued in an inclusive environment. The fourth strategic direction deals with students who graduate, and that they graduate with confidence, a skill set that leaves them with choices beyond K to 12, and that they have the knowledge and the ability to thrive, which is really important. Another component we heard from the multi-year strategic plan is from the business and operations sides, that they wanted to see themselves explicitly identified within the multi-year strategic plan. Under the pillar of revitalize, we speak about realizing learning and working environments to provide inclusive, safe, modern, and environmentally sustainable spaces for both students and staff. So these 5 priorities represent our strategic direction proposal. On the next slide, we'll see in terms of accountability, there are 11 indicators, and these 11 indicators serve as our baseline for future years, where there may be an opportunity to consider future indicators. These indicators align directly with the ministry priorities articulated under the Student Achievement Plan. And as we progress to the next slide, we know conditions of success encompass a combination of factors that contribute to achieving positive outcomes. Successful conditions are often contextually dependent and require a thoughtful and adaptable approach to align with desired results. The following conditions of success are proposed: for accessibility and inclusion, that we provide equity of access of outcomes and experiences to all students across the district. That there's a culture of human rights and respect. So we foster a culture of human rights and respect which enables all learning and working environments to be safe, welcoming, and inclusive. A third condition deals with strategic, agile, and equitable leadership. So looking at strategic leaders that are able to allocate resources, delegate responsibilities, and empower staff to implement the multi-year strategic plan. The final 2 conditions deal with partnering with parents, caregivers, guardians, and community members. As we are hearing, these are important partnerships to enact the multi-year strategic plan for all students. And finally, having effective and regular communication with all our partners in education, and how we demonstrate a commitment to sharing information on the advancement of the multi-year strategic plan over the 4 years that's in play. On the next slide, it provides you with a visual representation of the proposal of what the multi-year strategic plan could look like, which identifies the four strategic directions, including the implementation of truth and reconciliation. This is encompassing around the foundation of equity, which undergirds the 4 strategic directions. And on the last slide, I'm happy to take any feedback or questions that you may have on the report for receipt. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a short speakers list. We have Trustee Laskin, followed by Vice Chair Shen, and then Trustee Earhart.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If we could go back to the value slide for a minute. Or I can begin talking while you're looking at it. First of all, I really want to thank staff very much for this work. I'm really quite impressed with how far it's come, and have very few comments, but I do have a couple. One is, I'm wondering if the first thought here, I'm wondering if you can just run the language by SEAC, because I'm thinking that it really should say including students with all abilities as opposed to disabilities. I'm not quite sure what the proper way of phrasing is, but I would appreciate or differing abilities is language I've heard. I think that's potentially the way to frame it, as opposed to students with disabilities. So I'm asking you to to check that language. And then in the second last slide, I'd also like you to check the language of stakeholder. I'm really not crazy about stakeholder, like just the word stakeholder. I really effective and it's the one before this last diagram, which I really like, by the way. I like how it's circular. I'm surrounded by truth and reconciliation and equity. I really like that portrayal. But this last point about effective regular communication with all stakeholders, I'm just not crazy about the word stakeholders. Stakeholders feels foreign to me as opposed to part of the community and part of the partners that we have. So those are my only two wordsmithing things that I'd appreciate maybe another look at. But those are my comments, Madam Chair. I think this is great work. Thank you.
Okay, up next we have Vice Chair Shen.
Through you, Madam Chair, I want to thank all the staff that were involved in this process. I know it took longer than expected with a longer timeline. So thank you for persevering through this and getting this to this point. I have some questions. I mean, overall, I like the way it is. It is easier to communicate. It's easier to connect for people. I think to a certain extent, like, we would be able to generate what are our priorities, but it's how we communicate it to build a culture in the organization, and making it simple, making it relatable, making it rememberable, if that's a word, is critical. So it looks great, and I also like the fact the revitalized piece. Often, we talk about student achievement, wellness, and all this stuff, but the core infrastructure that needs to be looked at, if it's crumbling or if it's not transforming itself, you cannot achieve the other one. So I'm glad to see that piece as one of the pillars as well. Few questions. One, the 8,000 consultation, how many of them were online?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I would ask System Superintendent Addo or Tana Turner, if she is with us, to answer this question.
Thank you. And through the chairs, approximately 3,650 submissions were online.
Thank you very much. I know there was some conversation about multilingual outreach, and also the map wasn't surprising to me because it's identical to the maps that we see all the time, whether it be City of Toronto's consultation or consultations by the school board, or who calls the city's ombudsman, who calls the counselors for help. You map out anything, that map is very common. And that talks to a lack of, I wouldn't say lack of interest, but lack of outreach capabilities and communication strategies that are effective to. So I think now that this is passed, I'm hoping that is also noted that in future, there's a general way to correct these so that when we do the next one, it's not trying to be corrected during the consultation, but it's actually the infrastructure for consultation and communication are built over the few years. So when we do it, because it's really hard during the time of a consultation to try to address those barriers and to get the results, but it's easier if we plan now that if we were to do this 4 years from now, this map ideally should be looking different naturally. And hope, I don't want to ask that as a question, but I wanted to make it as a comment. The other comment I want to make is that these overarching themes that emerge from a lot of data is critical, but I think the second and third layer, not the fourth, fifth layers of data that are very, there might be privacy concerns and other things, but second, third layer of data that's below this is critical for us to look at, whether it be by Learning Center, whether it's through teams. So I'm hoping, since we collected all this and kept on prioritizing to get to these words that are sometimes quote unquote motherhood, they say it's like, the details and nuances might be lost. So if there is the possibility of the research team or the planning team to, before there's an operational plan, develop some sort of a consolidation of things we heard, could be a good driving document for us to continue to refer to as we do this, because that is the depth of the consultation that lies in this next two layers of data. The last comment I want to make is around equity. This is the million-dollar question all the time. Do we do equity separately? Equity should be everybody's role. So why name it separately? We need to embed it. But then it becomes everybody's responsibility, sometimes nobody's responsibility. And sometimes in all of our discussion, I would prefer to be in a space where I am able to say, look at our priorities. Equity is there for people who may not see that naturally as a priority, because that's often questioned nowadays around why this, why that. So if it's not going to be one of the priorities, then what is it as an overarching theme? And how can those indicators actually be broken down around equity? So until I see that comfortable presence of thing, it'll be very difficult to leave that out and rely on everybody's goodness to incorporate equity on its own, because if that's the case, then we wouldn't have the needs we have. So I would caution leaving it out without having a proper, very strong way of communicating and incorporating into its indicators, into the guiding principles, and explicitly labeling it so that we can continue to be driven by that. I'll finish that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Shen. Up next, we have Trustee Earhart.
Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah, and my questions are like at finer points, and it's because we received so much information on this, and I'm so appreciative of it and all of the work that's happened, so just thank you. My in the weeds question is around the ministry metric for attendance and the 90%. And I'm first just wondering how many days that is, either a year, how many missed, if a student's missed 10% the year, roughly how many days is that, just for my own, does anyone have it? I'm trying to understand how many days before a student gets classified for a report back to the ministry on this.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. It's 175 days, Trustee Earhart.
75. Okay, sounds good. And then I'm just wondering if we, as trustees, receive routine information around student attendance outside of that metric. I'm still learning the rhythms. Is there a routine opportunity where we see attendance trends at this time?
Thank you, and through you, I will be inviting System Leader Shameen Sandhu to comment more deeply in response to your question, Trustee Earhart. But staff certainly are looking forward to working alongside Director Russell Rollins to be taking your final approved multi-year strategic plan, and as Trustee Shan has talked about, an operational plan for indicators, and to be developing a report structure for the Board of Trustees in regards to each of those KPIs and priorities. So you can be looking forward to that. But I invite Senior Manager Sandhu to talk a little bit about attendance and how we monitor that through the system. Shameen?
So much.
Yeah. Thank you, Associate Director Srisco, and good evening, everyone, and through the chair. In professional support services, and I'm sure many of you know, we have attendance counselors attached to our department. Every single school space has an attendance counselor. In the elementary sector, the social workers play that dual role. And for high schools, we have attendance counselors that are separate from the socio-emotional support pieces in the sense of counseling. Although, as we know, attendance counselors do a lot of that collaboratively with the school administrators, guidance, as well as community in order to really help support and re-engage a young person back into schooling. One of the things that we have continually done for some time now with attendance counselors at the beginning of the school year, we remind every single school space about what our attendance policies and procedures are. In particular, with respect to collecting data, anytime a student has been absent for 15 days, we automatically expect, and that's as per the Education Act, as well as our own policies and procedures, that a referral is completed by the school administrator to get the attendance counselor involved. And then it's not sort of like, you know, the school's done with this young person. The whole point is to work collaboratively to really find out what is happening, how we can support, how we can scaffold, how we can build a community of care. We connect with our community partners, ensure that identity affirming supports are available, and also provide those curated supports and resources to the schools for those particular young people. And that's part of the capacity building we've been doing over the few years, especially during COVID, when there was a lot of concern about students that weren't coming online or turning their cameras off. In addition to that, with Associate Director Sarisco and with sort of the key KPIs that the ministry has right now, we're working on additional deeper learning. There's a long-term and a short-term plan. The long-term plan is to make it essential for every administrator, guidance person who deals with young people in attendance, as well as office assistants that are in the schools and know those students extremely well, to learn about the attendance protocols and procedures so that when students are not coming, all of those pieces can get ignited with making the referral to the attendance counselor, and again, bringing in the supports that we need with our parents, guardians, and caregivers. The short-term plan, which we're hoping to get up and running in the next couple of months, is sort of very easy to sort of see flow charts and video clips that are very, very short that we can send to the system and provide to each administrator again to remind them and to the staff that support attendance in school spaces about just ensuring that we're capturing the students that are not coming. It doesn't have to be 15 consecutive days. Students who may have limited attendance, that's sporadic, just so that we're on top of it and we're working as a team together collectively to make sure that we're enhancing attendance protocols. So overall, 90% seems to feel very jarring, but we're really looking forward to the initiatives that we're putting into place, to get that to that point where we can really bring that KPI to fruition in a really good way, but more than anything, make sure young people are feeling engaged and connected and affirmed in the spaces that they're in. Does anybody have any questions about that? I hope that was helpful.
That was so helpful for me. Thank you so much. I feel I almost want to see if any of the other trustees have any questions building on that before I ask my other questions, as they were on a different vein. But just thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I had one other comment question, and it's about the report on kindness. And I just was so delighted to see this. Thank you so much. There were a few nuggets in there that for me were really some learning. One was about, and I'm going to quote you from the report, working towards respectful learning environments, it is equally important to create brave spaces that can confront structures of oppression. And I really appreciated that. And the quote that followed, it's something that I'm going to, brave spaces rather than safe spaces is something I'm going to really take myself. And so thank you very much. I did want to ask a bit about this and the concept of empathy and how it relates to the work that we're doing in this space and around what we have in the multi-year strategic plan for belonging. I'd be really interested in people's thoughts on that. And just one more note before I end. There was in the report, there was reference to appendices at the end that I didn't see included in my agenda package. And so maybe for full board, I'll just follow up by email just to make sure in case they were missing. It was one on professional support staff to student ratios. It says see Appendix G, and I couldn't find Appendix G. But that's it. And thank you. I'd love a response around empathy. And thank you.
Thank you. And through you, expression of gratitude, Trustee Arts, for reading our report so deeply, and an expression of gratitude to Trustee McLean for asking for that information. I am going to invite Senior Manager David Cameron to speak to your question in regards to empathy, and then I'll comment about the appendices concluding. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Associate Director. Through the chair, pleasure to be here. Yeah, you're right, and I think in connecting empathy to belonging, because empathy is a construct of having perceptive understanding or a projection of somebody else's potential experiences. Identity and belonging, the way we gauge that, and that's in this particular appendices D, the way we get at some of that, and from a metric or an analytical perspective, is through the perspective of students in relation to how they feel about the environment they're in. And you can see that in some of the items around their own identity and how they feel about their identity in the buildings, whether they're hiding an identity. That's a particularly troubling measure inside of this report, I think. And so that those areas are you could consider all of those from an environmental or a school perspective, an institutional perspective, always the challenge. And these kinds of measures they're complicated. They're perceptive in nature, but they're also, we need to always kind of reflect them back into the school space and the institution and institutional practices around how students perceive things. So that's where you would see those analytics coming forward in terms of students' perceptions about their identity, how they feel, are they representativeness when you have the Power BI tool around the ward census reports around, do they see their identity reflected in curriculum and materials and books? All of that is part of kind of an empathetic understanding in terms of pedagogic work.
Thank you very much.
And Trustee Ahart, I apologize, my brain, I'm a morning person as well as the chair. This appendices have had many edits, so the appendices somehow were missing. So if you can indulge me, we'll send the full document through Trustee Weekly for you.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Erhard. Up next, we have Trustee King.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. This has been a very long, involved process that staff has taken this through, and again, just really commend the work and perseverance through it. I was present through a ward meeting. I was present through a couple of different CAC consultations, and we had many conversations as trustees. And I can really see the reflection of the evolution of those conversations. I can see the focus and the refinement in what you've presented, and I know that wasn't easy, so again, just thank you. I do have a question around the indicators and measurement and progress. So I think one of the common things that I know I heard throughout the consultations is many folks didn't necessarily have a disagreement with the pillars of the plan. A lot of question really came around implementation and measurement. So if I'm looking at the indicators here, I understand that these are all provided by the ministry. And you do note within the report itself that you're aware that it doesn't fully reveal the successes of different groups of students. So my question is, for folks who may be interested in some specific measures, so for instance, if they wanted to look at the graduation rates of Black students in the system, where would that be reflected in the indicators here? And I'll get even more specific. If we're looking at an example of one of the indicators here, like, where are we? I won't pick one specifically. If there was a disproportionality within one of the government-provided indicators, where would we see that?
Thank you very much. Through the chair, as you know, the TDSB has reported on the disparities and disproportionate outcomes of different groups of students based on particular data sets. That will continue and will be part of what we report back to the board. Although we are asking you to stay with the 11 indicators in the first year of implementation of the multi-year strategic plan, we will make that more explicit over time. It is also our intention to build a public dashboard where progress, both in terms of the actions being implemented, that will be in the annual operating plan, but also the indicators change over time so that the public can check the dashboard at certain intervals and see the changes that are occurring.
Thank you for that. And I do think that dashboard would be tremendously helpful. I think it relates to the point that Trustee Shan made earlier, that folks are looking for equity specifically in that plan. They want to see where it lives, what it looks like, how it's being acted upon. And I think being able to see that in the indicators really supports that. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee King. Up next, we have Trustee Sriskandarajah. Trustee
I don't know why there's
Sriskandarajah.
always a delay. Thank you through you, Madam Chair. Just one question, a comment. Thank you to staff for this. I know, you know, a lot of work went into this. We're doing a part of other multi-year strategic plans, and I think I can safely say this is one of the most thoroughest with the most sort of consultations and engagement. And so I really appreciate that. It would be easy, very easy not to do any of that and just put out a report, but we haven't done that. We've gone the long and hard route. So I really appreciate that. And I just wanted to share that. The only comment I want to say is I think this is really great. I think it's easy to digest for people. Maybe, and just a suggestion, maybe we could have sort of maybe a one-pager on some of the things that don't come under our purview or some of the things we have less control over. I think sometimes what happens in these processes is that people get really excited and then when things don't happen, they kind of feel disheartened, saying, well, you know, you told us all these things, or you heard us say all these things, and we thought there was going to be a plan. So things like, you know, I know one of the comments was about stable staffing and school facilities. We just had a conversation about that in the previous item. So kind of putting, you know, in a very simple one pager maybe that goes along with this, just giving a little bit of context of, you know, because I get this email a lot, I'm sure everyone else does as well, when teachers are moved or there aren't teachers in the classroom, and there's sort of the sense that, oh, we're just not hiring teachers at the TDSB. So not really getting at the complexity of it. So maybe kind of, and then similar things for the facilities, right, that we're just underfunded. So again, just a suggestion, but just so that our multi-year strategic plan makes sense and what we can do and what we can't do, right? This isn't a plan that's going to fix all our problems, but you know, we just want to give realistic hope. So just, again, just a suggestion. That's all for me. Thank you again to staff.
I think the director would like to respond, Trustee Sriskandarajah.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, staff have engaged in exactly that conversation, and our best thinking is to contain that within the Q&A that will eventually, the question and answer document that will eventually accompany the multi-year strategic plan to talk about what it doesn't have scope over.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. Glad to hear that staff are thinking about this.
Thank you. And our final speaker on the list is Trustee Arts. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you to staff for this. Based on being on the committee and seeing the evolving discussions in the different forums we've been to, I really do appreciate the language that is accessible and relatable. I really like the switch from, I can't remember what it was, transform on that to revitalize, and the different colors under there. I am quite impressed with the depth of how we're going to support student success, that is, can get at the needs of individual students. as opposed to simply reflections of the system. And there was a question earlier about the kind of language we would use around disability. And I would agree with Trustee Laskin that it would be best to run that past our special education advisory committee advocates. But I know from the conversations there that the push is really for us to use the clear language that's related to the Ontario Human Rights Code, and that would be our duty to accommodate students with disabilities. And they really are pushing back against sugar-coated language like special education, but really asking them directly is the best way forward. And I think one of the things I've noticed over the years, and we don't do this consistently, I noticed during the pandemic when we had a lot of data and presentations from Toronto Public Health or in collaboration with Toronto Public Health, we also had the data coming from our schools overlaid with the density and the city population data. Because we do see, I agree with everything that Trustee Shan said in terms of reaching those communities, making sure that we're always putting that effort in and differentiating our approaches to reach those communities who've not had voice. But we're always going to get certain patterns in our data because of where our schools actually are, where our families live, the density in different neighborhoods. We direct our resources based on need, but in terms of student numbers, the reality is that LC4 has way more schools and way more students than the other LCs, and there's no way around it. That's how we divided up the board in terms of the different areas. There's also swaths of industrial and green areas where people don't actually live, and we're never going to get pieces in there. I think it would be helpful if we consistently had our survey and consultation maps overlaid with our schools and population density. I think it would help us anyway see where the gaps are actually sitting if we see schools and know in certain areas and where people live, and the reduced interactions, those would be areas we'd want to target and focus on for supports. But overall, I really want to commend staff on the approach to doing this work, and taking the time to go out to communities and really listen to their perspectives that came in, and to make things straightforward. And I'm looking forward to what are the progression of this and the next steps in implementing the new multi-year strategic plan. So thank you.
Trustee Arts, the director would like to respond.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I just have a closing remark whenever it's appropriate.
I think now would be the perfect time. We have no more speakers on the list.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the trustees who have participated in various aspects of the development of the multi-year strategic plan. We are especially grateful to the thousands of students, staff, community members, caregivers, parents, and guardians who participated in the development of this plan. This is really their work that we endeavored to translate in a way that was understandable for all of our communities, and to guide communication and our precise focus on improving student achievement, belonging, equity, and well-being, with the goal of ensuring that all of our students graduate with the confidence and skills they need to thrive. I am particularly grateful to the leadership, for the leadership of Superintendent Elizabeth Addo, Turner Consulting through Tana Turner, our research team, Executive Superintendent Lynn Strangway, who began this process, and the entire senior team who have grappled with the content of the multi-year strategic plan. We look forward to bringing to you for approval a new multi-year strategic plan, inspiring minds and building futures, at our February PPC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. And with that, I think we can open the vote on this one. I need a mover and a seconder. Trustee King
Sriskandarajah?
and Trustee Sriskandarajah. Thank you.
Trustee Williams in favor.
Trustee Nunziata in favor.
Patel in favor.
Chernis Lynn in favor.
Shan in favor.
Pei in favor.
In favor.
Logical Singham in favor.
Trustee Gose, how do you vote? Trustee Gose, how do you vote? Marker is absent. And that has carried. Next up, we have item number 7.5. This is the ventilation-related investments, challenges, and opportunities on capital projects and opportunities to reduce respiratory viruses. I'm going to ask the director to introduce this report, please.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, I will invite Executive Officer Maya Puccetti to present this report.
Thank you. Through the chair, good evening, trustees. This report is for receipt and is in response to Part B of the trustee motion, which dates from the end of August 2023. A letter was sent to the Minister of Education in early September, which is as per Part A of the motion. The board's ventilation webpage contains a lot of information regarding the type of ventilation in schools and the ongoing measures to maximize fresh air and ventilation within buildings, as well as addressing air filtration. As noted on the ventilation webpage, there are 325 ventilation-related renewal projects planned and underway for 23-24, which represents an investment of approximately $143 million. As noted on the webpage, TDSB continues to operate mechanical systems to maximize the amount of fresh air brought into the building and to improve airflow within the buildings. The report also provides information regarding measures to address air filtration. TDSB was one of the first boards to provide HEPA units for every occupied space in schools, regardless of whether or not there was mechanical ventilation in the building. There are approximately 16,000 HEPA units distributed to schools, and as you'll know from the report, over the summer, we replaced the filters in those HEPA units. So those units have a capacity to handle a room that is up to 1,500 square feet in area. And given that the average TDSB classroom is 750 square feet, the Austin filter can complete 2 to 3 air exchanges per hour at the high setting. These filter units were selected because at the time they satisfied several important criteria: room size capacity, filtration capacity, durability, and importantly, availability, given that we needed thousands of units to be delivered to schools in a short period of time. As noted in the report, we did replace the filters in these units at all schools and admin centers. And the filters, the replacement filters, were provided by the ministry at no cost to the board. The report also speaks to other investments, including building automation systems, which we refer to as BAS, and the installation of CO2 sensors and occupancy sensors on new ventilation equipment. And this is to monitor the fresh air that's delivered to schools in relation to occupancy levels. This program is closely coordinated with the BAS upgrades and new ventilation installations and the recommissioning of ventilation system controls. Over the past few years, CO2 sensors have been installed in approximately 140 schools and in new ventilation equipment for new builds and replacement systems. This will continue for current and future ventilation and BAS renewal work. The report also provides information related to ongoing efforts undertaken by TDSB with regard to reducing respiratory viruses in schools. Above all, we continue to seek and follow guidance from Toronto Public Health. The report notes that masks, hand sanitizer, wipes, and rapid antigen tests are provided to schools at no cost to the board until the end of the school year. In terms of cleaning, caretaking staff continue to sanitize high-touch surfaces during the school day, and if requested, we will support vaccination clinics at schools for students and the community, as we did during the pandemic. We continue to send seasonal reminders to caretaking and school administrators regarding the benefits of operating HEPA units during the day in the classroom, as well as promoting outdoor learning activities at schools. The report speaks to the challenges of adding new ventilation systems to existing schools from a building logistics point of view, as well as explaining the current funding limitations we face given the size and age of the TDSB portfolio. We need a stable multi-year funding source, as these improvements take many years to plan and implement and represent millions of dollars of capital investment, and may require the relocation of the occupants from the building. So major ventilation improvements, be it upgrades or adding new ventilation, should therefore be considered within the capital revitalization strategy framework, which was introduced earlier tonight. I am joined by Senior Manager Jetin Amin and Manager Maurice Buenastella, both of whom are very knowledgeable with regards to mechanical engineering and our TDSB building portfolio. And together we will endeavor to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a short speaker list at the moment. We have Trustee McLean, followed by Trustee Dawson and Trustee Earhart.
Thank you, through the chair. I found it was quite interesting, the delegation that Mr. Furness gave earlier in the evening, and I wanted to give staff an opportunity to discuss this a little bit. He was talked about HEPA filters being assigned to particular rooms, like the gymnasium of a school for traditional use, that, you know, of a class coming in and participating, and then that space being used differently than it's normally intended, and having a number of additional people in, and that creating a different kind of challenge. And he suggested that, if I understood correctly, that there was potentially an area that about the staff being uninformed, and that there may be a need to change the number of HEPA filters for a particular room or space given the activity that you're going to run within it. So I was interested in exploring that conceptually, and whether staff has given any consideration to something else he suggested in terms of caretaker training around when you might have to do this, and the ability and when to adapt, and that there isn't universal rules, and that these are kind of moving targets sometimes, depending on our usage in our buildings in unique circumstances. And so I'd like to, if staff could kind of follow up on those two areas, please.
Thank you, through the chair. So to Trustee McLean, I think there are quite a few things we would need to understand first with regards to when these kinds of special events are being held in a gymnasium, for example. Quite a few of our gymnasiums have ventilation. So is there something we can do with the ventilation operating schedule for that day, that evening, to ensure that we're maximizing the amount of fresh air we bring into the building? Many of our gymnasiums don't have electrical wall outlets everywhere in some of our older gyms. So then there's that whole issue of, well, how many can you plug in one room without, say, tripping the electrical service? And that's the challenge we have at TDSB. We don't have one rule that fits all. We have several different things that we need to think about and consider when it comes to these kinds of special events in gymnasiums or in auditoriums or even in libraries, you know, where you get more people congregated in that space. You know, what are the other measures that you can put in place? And we do provide a fair amount of training to our caretakers. They do, quite a few of our gymnasiums do have HEPA filters. I don't think we have shared that information about adding more HEPA filters, but those are some of the other questions we would want to provide our caretakers to ask to find out whether they can make changes to the ventilation schedule or if they have enough sufficient electrical outlets to plug in those HEPA filters. So we can certainly look into providing more of that info.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, I guess what struck me about the presentation, and I agree that, you know, we have an abundance of buildings, all with different facilities, and all except that Mr. Furness may not have been privy to all the information that went into that decision. But it raised an interesting question about, or for me it did at least, about buildings we thought were safe before for certain unusual uses, and the thought processes that go into since the pandemic around all of these questions. And you know, a gym in a facility that isn't as well ventilated, maybe doesn't have as many windows that you could potentially open, may have been a good place before the pandemic to have an elementary graduation, but may not be any longer, given you know. So do we, are we wrestling with these kinds of things? And is this something that we look at from either a facilities team to get to know their buildings so that on top of making this determination? Or is this like an ongoing thing where we continue to learn? Or are we fundamentally waiting until all these ventilation that are described in the report, these improvements, take place?
Through the chair, so if you can recall the climate action report that we presented a couple months ago, one of the things that we have been drilling down into is building operation. We've been looking at a sort of series of schools in, I believe it's LN1, and I'm going to go to Manager Bonestella to correct me on this. And one of the things we're drilling down on is actually looking in closer detail to the operating schedule of ventilation systems at these schools to get a better understanding of, you know, where there are sort of pressure times where, and graduations would be prime example where we can increase the ventilation in those schools, or when we get a call from a caretaker who says something special is happening, can you do something about it? So we're slowly expanding that program to develop that level of detailed knowledge about the operation of our buildings. And I think we're only going to learn more as we go forward with those systems. One thing I do want to add is a lot of our mechanical systems are while they can increase fresh air into the building, they may not have sufficient cooling. So for example, a graduation that's held on a very hot day in June, even with the ventilation on, may not cool that space sufficiently.
Thank you, and again, through the chair, that's great. I'm glad that we're, but I've, as well as graduations that happen once a year, quite often elementary schools will have assemblies where they'll have the entire student bodies in there and be, sitting in pretty close proximity on the floor to one another. So I'm excited that I'm pleased that we're, and encouraged that we're looking into this and continuing to evaluate to make sure that we're doing everything we can protect the safety and well-being of our students. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. Up next, we have Trustee Dawson.
Can you hear? Oh, thank you. And through the chair, thank you, Trustee McLean, for asking the majority of my questions. This was a very interesting report, and I really also enjoyed, and I'm still kind of digesting the delegations tonight. I just had a question about the ministry's provision of the HEPA filters and what kinds of instructions accompanied that? Were we just given them all and there was no instructions for use or requirement?
Through the chair, just to be perfectly clear, we receive funding from the ministry for the majority of the HEPA filters. We went through a selection process ourselves to pre-qualify and select the filters that we had at the time. Later on, the ministry did provide other HEPA filters for us. I think we have approximately 700 of these other filter units that were provided by the ministry to us. We call them the Jade filter, and they are smaller capacity. And so how they've been distributed in schools is not so much in classrooms, but in smaller rooms, resource rooms, and other spaces like that. So the ministry didn't really provide us with direction on how to use the HEPA filters. I mean, we've followed whatever are the manufacturers, the best recommendations as to where to place the units in classrooms and, the specs on how much they, can filter. So all of that was reviewed at the time when we went forward with selecting these units. So as I said, at the time, based on the criteria that we had and based on what was available in the marketplace, these had scored the highest, and we were able to get them to schools relatively quickly.
Add through the chair, Toronto put a HEPA unit in every single classroom. And that was not the direction that was provided by the ministry. So I want to be very clear that we went over and above the direction provided by the ministry. The ministry said one in every kindergarten classroom, and I think one in classrooms that didn't have mechanical ventilation. So we went above and beyond, and certainly above and beyond. Most school boards, I would have said, and I would have been at a different school board at the time, followed that instruction to the T and didn't place them in every single classroom.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful context. Who is responsible for operating the HEPA filters in each classroom? Is it the teacher? Are they required?
Thank you through the chair. The way our guideline is written, we recommend that whoever is the first person that arrives in the classroom, and that's typically the teacher, that they would turn the units on. Our guideline has always recommended, you know, leave it on high for an hour or two, then turn it to the medium setting for the day, and our caretakers will turn the units off in the evening as they do their rounds cleaning every classroom.
Okay, thank you. And I just have a final comment that I really was intrigued by this idea of a fact sheet. I think it's worth exploring. I think it's worth exploring having an educational fact sheet for custodial staff and teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dawson. Up next, we have Trustee Earhart.
Thanks very much. And I want to say a big thank you to staff. I know you've had lots of conversations with me, and I feel like this topic, and I know after the delegations, I sometimes feel a lot of sadness and fear. Because when we talk about the spread of disease in congregated settings like schools, it's a scary thing. It's a scary thing everywhere. It's a scary thing everywhere I go. But this report did give me a lot of hope. And it gave me a lot of hope because in the face of very little funding and very little guidance, I see there is a range of considerations being taken. And so I really want to applaud staff who I know our facility staff are really thinking hard about what can be done within the constraints, within an enormously complex system and constraints. And I really want to applaud everyone here from that. And I'm coming in as a relatively new trustee who was not here during the pandemic. And so I'm taking a look at what do we have at present and where could we go from there. And I have to say, I was really excited about a lot in this report, including the CO2 monitoring. I'm going to talk about the stuff where I'd like more information because that's just the time we have. But I think there's a lot here that I really want to congratulate, and I look forward to hearing more about over time. So one thing that stood out for me just was about ASHRAE. That was something I've been really hoping to better understand through this. And I think I'm getting it now. The new standard is for infection risk management, and there is an existing standard. We are designing, and what I wanted to ask was, are we designing to either one? Like when we have mechanical ventilation, could systems meet either standard, or do you have to do specific infrastructure investments to get from one to the other? Is that something that someone could answer?
Thank you through the chair. I am going to turn that question over to either Senior Manager Amin or Manager Buenastello. It has more technical details to it than I would know at this time. I don't know.
I can take that question if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Great, and through the chair, I can respond to that. So there are two standards as we mentioned. ASHRAE 62.1 is the ventilation for acceptable indoor air quality standard, and that's been around now for many years. And so that's the basic standard that gets incorporated into many building codes. So that's the standard that we would work with generally our external consultants, our mechanical design engineers on new ventilation projects. And so new ventilation projects would be designed to that standard. And so that standard applies to new buildings and additions to existing buildings. Now, one thing to be aware of is that it doesn't necessarily apply to replacement projects where we have existing equipment and that has to be replaced. And so there are some limitations where that can be applied. But again, we always strive to meet ASHRAE 62.1. And that's the base ventilation standards for building. The other standard that is very recent, it came out in the summer of 2023, is ASHRAE 241. And that's called the Control of Infectious Aerosols standard. And so it does not really talk about ventilation per se, because that's already covered in the previous standard. So what this standard talks about, it's a mode that a building can be switched into during periods that are called an infection risk management mode. So if a health authority declares that there is a pandemic state, what this standard talks about is how the building can go to an enhanced level of aerosol control. So it's not really ventilation per se, it's trying to reduce risk of aerosols. And they do that by increasing what they call the equivalent ventilation rate, which includes essentially air filtration and air purification. So it's not quite the same, and it's a voluntary standard. It's quite new. We are reviewing it, and so we have seen it, and we have been in contact with our other colleagues at other school boards. And at this point, I'm not aware of anyone who's implemented that, but we are aware of this particular standard.
Okay, thank you. And I'm wondering if we build, like in our design guidelines, if we build to ASHRAE 62.1, if we ever needed to, could we meet this standard 241-2023? Or would it require capital upgrades to achieve? It sounds like it would require operational costs if you're going to flow more air, but would it require more capital updates to achieve?
Likely, because one way to meet the standard would be to massively increase the amount of ventilation, which is not doable on a lot of our systems. Our systems don't have this extra capacity to bring in more fresh air. On top of that, it's not a really efficient way of meeting the standard, because when you bring in additional outdoor air, especially during cold weather, there is a huge penalty that you pay for in gas consumption. So that's not really an effective way to meet the standard. Really, what they recommend in that particular standard is to get into enhanced filtration, and we've gone along with that to quite an extent with our HEPA filters, because part of that standard is to get high efficiency filters like HEPAs into the spaces, and you can also do that at the air handler. So really, the way to achieve that enhanced standard would be to invest in even more additional filtration than we currently have. So definitely there's going to be a cost implication to do that.
Okay, thanks very much. That really helps me understand that there's options for how to achieve it, and that some would be operational with losses to heating, and some would be on the capital side. Thank you. I'm going to turn my mind now to HEPAs, because we heard through delegations, and this is something I've been reading all the documents. So I've been reading the September note that came out just after our motion from Deputy Minister of Education, Kate Manson-Smith, that noted that the province has gone the step, let me make sure I get it here. Anyway, that the province has gone the step of that there are HEPAs in every occupied classroom, province-wide, that they're mandated. But there's nothing that says they have to be on. There's nothing, I've not found in any document anywhere that the HEPAs need to be on. And this is really challenging for public confidence, and I don't know what to do about this. So I'm really interested. I know it's clear to me that the province is not requiring them to be on or giving clear guidance for how long or what should be taking place in that regard. How can we operationalize that the HEPAs are turned on? And what kind of indicators do we have that they are on? Because what we hear frequently as trustees are that they aren't on. And certainly when I'm going around, I see that they aren't always on. They are on sometimes though, but they aren't always. And so I'm just curious to know how we're operationalizing this. Thank you.
Through the chair, thanks for that question, Trustee Earhart. And I think you and I have had a few discussions about this, and it's certainly something that we continually send reminders to schools and our caretakers about the benefits of using the HEPA filters in the classrooms. We do have a protocol for when a HEPA filter is not working or is broken. It can be replaced very quickly. Like, we send these reminders out all the time to schools vis-a-vis using the HEPA filters. You know, I think the concept of making the use mandatory in classrooms would be very challenging to operationalize. I'm not sure who would be the person that would turn into, for lack of a better word, the HEPA police. I don't know what the consequences would be. You know, it's not something that can, you know, without a lot of thought, be considered at the school level. And so what we do is, as I say, just continually remind everyone of the benefits of the HEPA units.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate this, but I'm struggling because I don't know how to make that better. If they're there and not being turned on, or if the public doesn't have confidence that they're being turned on, how can we move forward? And so that's something I'm putting forward to sort of leave because I don't have a clear outcome right now, but it's something that I'm very keen to see progress on, to see progress in knowing that they're on, in seeing that they're on, in having some understanding. I mean, perhaps it's through increased utility costs that we have evidence that they're being used. I don't know. I'd love to learn how we could move forward in that piece. And then am I out of time?
You are out of time. Would you like me to add you to the end of the list?
I did want to ask about funding, and so if possible, if everyone would humor me, I would
Okay,
love to.
I will
but
add you.
recognize-
I will add you back on. At this time, I need a motion to extend for a half hour.
Sriskandarajah.
Thank you, Trustee Sriskandarajah and Trustee King. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, we can continue. I'll put you on the list. Up next, we have Trustee Rajagulasingham. Please go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. First off, I want to thank staff for this report, as well as the many community members that have been really advocating hard for this the past 2 years. We all know, given the age of our school, as well as that $4 billion backlog in maintenance repairs, this is, of course, a concern for all of us. I really want to thank the delegates that came in today and just shared their expertise and experiences around this. And I had a few questions based off of what they have shared. Executive Officer Pichetti, you mentioned that caretakers are receiving professional development, which is great. But my question is, I'm assuming that a lot of learning was happening around the pandemic. How about now? How often is PD being offered to caretakers? Because I'm sure, the knowledge and technology is also changing. So how do we ensure that our caretakers have, the most up-to-date knowledge?
Thank you, and through the chair. And I think by way of response, I will actually ask Maurice Buenastella to tell you a little bit about the program that we're doing right now in, and again, I'm thinking it's LN1, but I would like him to just confirm for me, looking at, in more detail, the operation of mechanical systems in schools and the work we're doing with caretakers to give them some understanding and knowledge at a little bit more detailed level about ventilation. So Maurice, if you're there, I wonder if you could provide a little bit of a sort of summary of what that program is, and our goal is eventually that we will have this across the system.
Sure, and through the chair, I'll elaborate a bit. It is in LC1, and that is the learning center that we're piloting this initiative in. And essentially, it's to work one-on-one with caretakers to assist them not only to schedule their HVAC and mechanical systems, but to work with them so they understand the operating requirements of these systems and why you would schedule them in certain ways. So a lot of this training is now done one-on-one, and we've also had group training with caretakers that have common types of mechanical systems. So the feedback that we've gotten so far is very positive, and the caretakers have been very, very cooperative. During the initiative, and what we've seen already are not only operational improvements to the school, and that's with respect to temperature conditions and ventilation, but we're also seeing significant electrical and gas savings at some of the schools as a result of this. So that's a pilot initiative that we're working on now, and over the next few months, we'll be making recommendations as to the best way we can ramp this up to the other 3 learning centers.
Thank you, and through the chair. In the report, I was very concerned to hear that there's actually no building code or legislation requirement to install carbon monoxide devices. And Executive Officer Pichetti mentioned that 140 schools do have them. So my question is, how do we choose which schools receive them and which don't?
Thank you, and through the chair, in the report, we do mention that that installation is aligned with work that we're undertaking to either upgrade the building automation system, or when we put in new replacement mechanical ventilation, as well as, in capital builds, be they additions or new schools, where we have that opportunity to add them in. Again, I'll turn to Manager Buenastella if there's any other areas I'm missing where we've been adding those.
Sure, and through the chair, we don't specifically look at schools when deciding whether a CO2 sensor in that particular system makes sense. It's all based on the type of air handler and the type of ventilation system that is going into that school. Some ventilation systems work very well with CO2, others less so. So we try to target these sensors with systems where we can take advantage of CO2 to improve the operation of the system, and again, maximize the amount of fresh air. So it's really based on the system type. And when you take a look at the wide variety of HVAC systems we have in our schools, we'll target CO2 based on those needs rather than schools or geographical areas.
Okay, thank you for that. And through the chair, do we ever do checks on schools randomly to test air quality? I know we have experts in the building. We have a lot of strong caretakers in our schools. But just wondering if, as an extra pair of eyes, do we ever do random checks in our schools to ensure ventilation air quality is at top?
Thank you. Through the chair. Well, when there is a concern raised, we do have an entire procedure for investigating and following up. And as we've noted, in the work that we've been doing with caretakers to develop their understanding of the ventilation system, the mechanical systems, or, that this is also empowering them to notice things that are happening in the school. So we do have a process, but it's not a random one where we just turn up at a school and decide to do that. It's typically linked to where there's been a concern raised.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, I was just wondering, how do we how do we be more preventative versus reactionary? But okay. My next question is when we are looking at, I think it was the HEPA filters during COVID, we were able to get them all across all our schools. And I know how hard staff are working to do that as quickly as possible. But a question was raised during a delegation that we are doing equal distribution, making sure every school has one. But how do we ensure that our allocation is needs-based instead of making sure every school has at least one?
Thank you, and through the chair, and again, just for clarification, we've provided a HEPA filter for every occupied classroom, portable, resource room, library, across the system, every school. And if you go onto our ventilation webpage, there is a ventilation report that you can download, and you can select the school, and you will see how many HEPA filters are in each of the schools. And we've provided those HEPA filters regardless of whether the school has mechanical ventilation or not. It's based on occupied space.
Okay. And through the chair, looking at the 2021 Canada Infrastructure Program, did we ever share which schools received upgrades and what type? And do we have that information on a website anywhere?
Thank you. And through the chair, we have provided it for the last few years in the Major Capital and Renewal Project Status Update Report. Quite a mouthful. I got to think of a better title for that report. And we do provide it in that biannual report. I'm not sure if we've got it elsewhere on our webpage. I know that we list all our ventilation-related projects on our ventilation webpage, and that might indicate the actual funding source. The acronym that we use is SIVERUS, but I can check and let trustees know. I believe we do. I'm just not cluing into it right now.
Okay, through the chair. My final comment is, when it comes to this program, as well as, which schools may, and I don't know if this is possible, which schools have passive ventilations, which schools have a combo. I just think the more information that's on a site that's dedicated, or on a page dedicated to just ventilation and air quality, would be really helpful. With the $4 billion backlog, there's just so many concerns that we're facing right now. And I think there's a lot of community members that have been advocating for this, and having more information for them will help them in their advocacy as well as us. And on our website, things tend to get a bit lost. So having more information in a dedicated space, I think, would help in all of our shared advocacy. And again, I just want to really thank staff as well as the many community members that came forward to raise their concerns.
Thank you, Trustee Roger Kulasingam. Next is Trustee King.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I want to thank staff for the report. I think this motion was really helpful to generate some good information, and I enjoyed hearing from the delegates. They raised some really interesting points. There was a lot of learning for me, and I think for some other folks in the room as well. I was really interested to hear about the emerging options with UV light, the consideration around multi-use spaces that we talked about already, and the specificity of communications to caretakers. The other thing that we heard was a suggestion about an expert reference panel. I know that we have quite a level of expertise among staff, but I just wanted to know how staff feel about the possibility of having a body of experts for continued conversation and collaboration with facilities, just to continue generating best thinking and options, as the landscape potentially changes and the work continues. Is this something that you have already considered? And just how do you feel about potential benefits of that kind of collaboration?
Thank you, through the chair. We are members of a coalition of school boards, and you know, there are a lot of information and expertise that's brought to these meetings. And it's not that we aren't interested. In fact, we are interested, but we also know we have relatively unique kind of circumstances, A, with schools, and B, with at TDSB with our portfolio, which is, you know, among the oldest buildings in Ontario and very different. But we do have that kind of interaction that happens on a regular basis. What I can say is, you know, I would like to be able to take this away and talk to the staff and, you know, see how we can put this together. We're certainly not trying to, you know, avoid getting good information, but we are already actively involved in sharing and data collecting through other professional collaborations with other school boards. And we also have a lot of conversations with the ministry about this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee King. Last up on the speakers list, we have Trustee Earhart. Please go ahead.
Thanks everyone for humoring me. I just want to, we can't let this report go by without talking about funding. I really appreciated how clear this section was in speaking to what funding could be used to update systems, which the ministry so generously in its reply back noted that we should be using for this. I believe it's $40 million a year. Severus was an enormous amount of money over 18 months. Some would argue too much in 18 months because one requires time to plan strategic investments in an area like this. And so, I mean, not just for our board, system-wide. And so I'm trying to understand, and it was very helpful to see like roughly 10 years of investment. And my brain is one where I've worked on climate change and renewable energy investments for 25 years of my life. I like to think in a decade and how much money a year could get us there. I'm trying to ballpark what would be required. And so from seeing this report, it seemed to me like TDSB, $100 million a year of dedicated funding for capital HVAC improvements over 10 years could get us there. And if we are roughly 20% of the system, we're talking $500 million a year province-wide. School boards across Canada require this. This is not something that each province uniquely should be looking at. This is something that I see as all orders of government need to pull together to make investments for congregated settings for all vulnerable populations, and that includes children. And so I wanted to get staff's reactions to that. Is that like $100 million a year about what, when it was said 10 years of sustained investment, is that the order of magnitude that we're talking about to achieve modern design standards for HVAC in all schools?
Thank you through the chair. It's an interesting question and concept. I mean, you see from the list that is in our ventilation webpage, that represents $140 million worth of projects planned or underway. And that's for, say, 325 schools. So it doesn't, 100 million a year, I think, is about the right number. But the other complication with that is, you know, taking into account how to spend that, how to get the information that you need in order to spend it wisely, quickly, and what is the capacity of the industry to undertake that level of investment every year. And our buildings are occupied, and undertaking major ventilation upgrades in occupied buildings is very challenging, especially given the age of our buildings and environmental concerns. So, you know, I think on the surface, $100 million a year for our size of portfolio, yes, does make sense. I just think we would need to really figure out how to spend that in the best possible way in a time frame, a reasonable time frame. And if I can also add, the other thing to consider is from a cost-benefit analysis, and I think I've had a couple conversations with other trustees about this. At a certain point, when you look at the deferred maintenance backlog for a building, and you look at some of the other challenges, like, for example, accessibility or the suitability of program spaces, you put all of that together, you really want to ask yourself, do we want to spend that much money on a building, or should we really look at replacing that building? Because at this point, we're actually spending much more money to upgrade the building than to replace the building. Those are other things that we want to think about. And, you know, this is part of the conversations that we're going to be having with the capital revitalization framework as well.
Thanks very much. That's extremely helpful in tying back, just trying to get a sense of the order of magnitude, and certainly combined with our need for climate change investments, for mitigation, adaptation, our need to meet accessibility guidelines, and like 21st century ventilation and HVAC systems. I feel like that all makes a lot of sense. But it's really helpful to have an understanding of what those orders of magnitudes might be. To me, that seems like not that much. Like, it's not that much for children's health as we start to learn about this. It gives me hope that it's something that's in that order of magnitude, because that's a very achievable order of magnitude if a government were to commit. And if a society were to commit. And so I think that's very exciting and very hopeful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Earhart. Seeing no more questions in the chat and in the room, I just need a mover and a seconder for this report to, okay, thank you, Trustees McLean and DeVitis. And we can now open the vote on item 7.5.
Srinatharajan in favor.
Sean in favor.
Cherneslin in favor.
Trustee Patel in favor.
McLean in favor.
Dawson in favor.
Nunziata in favor.
Trustee Williams in favor.
Hastings is not here. Unless he's online. Is Trustee Hastings online? No, he's absent. Who are we still missing? Trustee Pei, Trustee Rajagulasingham, how do you both vote?
Rajagulasingham in favor.
Thank you. Trustee Pei? Oh, yeah, we do. Okay, mark absent. Mark them as absent then. Okay, we are going to close the vote on this. And that has carried. Just looking at the time and the agenda items still left to go, we have item number 7.6. I am wondering whether there is interest in deferring this item. It is an important item that deserves some serious discussion and us to have our best thinking. And you guys have already learned that I'm not really a night person, I'm a morning person.
Now we're going to do that. Now we're going to get to the point where our best thinking should happen. Sorry.
You can vote, against, but maybe this is more idea that, maybe you're just advocating that we should defer, just saying.
Hours ago, I should have been home.
Okay, so would you like to make a motion to defer this item, Trustee McLean? Trustee McLean and Trustee Earhart has seconded that. Can I ask for a show of hands on this, or say aye, please?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, we will defer this item. I would just like to draw everybody's attention to the next, to the regular meeting or to PNP? To the next regular meeting of PNP, okay. And I would just like to draw everybody's attention, there was a written notice of motion, 8.1 ban ads for gambling, and then I need a mover and a seconder to adjourn, which, thank you very much, Trustees DeVitis and Earhart. Thank you to staff and to all trustees. I know there's been a lot of complicated reports brought tonight, a lot of really interesting discussion. Everybody really brought their A game. And we really appreciate all the support from behind the scenes to Manchu, to Ms. Joseph Dowers, to the whole team who make these meetings work. Thank you so much. And to the, oh, I forgot to say all in favor on adjournment. I think I just assumed, Trustee McLean's like at the door. Is there anybody opposed to adjourning? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, I think that has passed. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Safe travels home.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks for all your